Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host Austin Davidson from Long Island, New York.
Heyo.
Today, Austin, we are going to be recapping the Steelers' 19-15 defeat to the Indianapolis Colts in the dress rehearsal game of the NFL preseason, Week 3. The Steelers did not have their best game, but ultimately it could be considered a success when you consider that there were not any significant injuries after this game. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty successful.
So, outside of that, do you have any other quick takeaways you wanted to get to on the game before we dive in deeper?
To start, I just want to say that so far that I'm 0-3 for predicting winners of these games, so I'm doing awfully. As for thoughts concerning the game, Landry Jones cemented his spot as the number 2 quarterback. Terrell Watson is becoming hard to cut. And the offense finally had a decent outing. However, the defense has been really struggling still. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple. Just, the opening sack and strip of Ben Roethlisberger is concerning, but he was okay. So, like I said, the health is the main important factor coming out of this game. The secondary has become a bit of a concern, however, and, I'm not concerned about the average performance from the starting offense. And like you were saying, Landry Jones cemented himself as the number 2 quarterback, and I didn't believe that to be something that should ever have been in doubt, but, it apparently was. So now that we can officially put that to rest, it's time to move on. So with that being said, we have some important Steelers news to get to, but before we get to the big pieces of news, the only injury to come out of this game was that of Fitzgerald Toussaint, who left with a leg injury, and his status for next week's game is uncertain at this point, and that's not good considering the fact that A, the game is tomorrow, and B, he might be running out of time to make the Steelers roster. With the fact that Niall Davis was a free agent acquisition this summer and Terrell Watson has emerged as a strong player in the preseason, do you think this could be the end of the road for Toussaint with the Pittsburgh Steelers?
It's really hard to tell because him and Niall Davis are very similar players where I feel like Toussaint is a slightly better runner while Davis is slightly better at kickoffs. Then Terrell Watson seems to be a better runner and pass catcher than both. I'm going to say that this is it for Fitz with the Steelers because of his injury, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't and they decided to cut Niall Davis and Terrell Watson instead. What do you think?
I think Toussaint is now on the outside looking in. Whether or not that fair is up for you to decide. I personally have always thought that Fitzgerald Toussaint was a better all-around running back than Niall Davis is, and I think that last week's performance watching Niall Davis try to run laterally as opposed to upfield is something that proves that. However, it is true that Davis is a better special teams player, especially when it comes to returns, and the emergence of Watson makes me hesitate when I think about who the Steelers might keep with potential upside. Toussaint needs to play tomorrow to have any chance of making this roster. That's the way I see it. And is it the end of his time? I hope not, but it's starting to look more and more like it could be the end for him. Now, the big piece of news that had all of Steeler Nation captivated today. It started out in the morning. We had a lot of changing to do to our little outline here. So first in the morning, the Browns released cornerback Joe Haden. That's a pretty big name. First-round pick in 2010, two-time Pro Bowler. Was considered at his best one of the top probably 3, 4, or 5 cornerbacks in the league when he was in his prime. Had an injury-riddled 2015 season and really struggled that year. He rebounded a little bit last year but was still relatively poor by his standards. And now the Browns decided to cut ties with him after he decided he did not want to accept a pay cut. So then the news came out that the Steelers were interested, and then, several other teams were. About an hour later, in fact, not even an hour later, it emerged that the Steelers were the favorites to land Joe Haden, which I don't know what you were thinking of at this time, Austin, but I was thinking, yeah, sure they are. The Steelers always, they flirt with these types of free agents, even someone like Dante Hightower from the offseason, but they rarely, if ever, sign these guys. And then all of a sudden, it was around, I think it was 4 p.m., Joe Haden was on the flight to Pittsburgh to visit with them tonight, and he already agreed to a 3-year, $27 million extension. So, in the course of one day, the Steelers went from having Ross Cockrell as their incumbent starter on the left side across from Artie Burns to potentially Joe Haden being a starter on the left side. A lot of Steeler Nation is quite ecstatic about this, but Austin, I know you don't share the same opinion that most of Steeler Nation does, don't you?
Yeah, I was quick this morning to say I had little to no interest in Hayden, only to find out a few hours later that the Steelers were the front runners, and then as of recently, he is now a Pittsburgh Steeler. So it's happened. It's here. But my problem with this is because most of the Steeler Nation is rejoicing, as you said. But he's just a lateral move in my mind. You get rid of Ross Cockrell or Cody Sensabaugh, whichever one was going to make it. And Hayden, in my mind, is at the same exact level as those guys. I adjusted that later because I was a little more mad at the moment, but I think Hayden's a little bit better than both. Just slightly better, but it's not like a crazy amount. I don't see him returning to his former glory. I talked to several people outside of Steeler Nation, and they all texted me and were like, yo, you got Hayden. And I was like, why does this matter, though? He hasn't been himself since 2014. That was 3 years ago. Why should I believe that he's going to be better? The last time we believed in a guy that had groin injuries and concussion history didn't really turn out well. A 5-year, $20 million contract. Oh, it might have been 4-year, $20 million. And that was Ladarius Green, and you saw how that panned out. That didn't pan out very well. It's just not. It doesn't sound that good to me. So, my worry is if he gets hurt, because he is an improvement over Ross Cockrell slightly, as I said. But if he gets hurt, it's like, what's the point of even signing him? I would have rather had Ross Cockrell. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really think has had a long injury history. I don't really remember a time where Cockrell wasn't playing.
But, I don't believe so. I don't. In fact, I don't think he's even missed a game.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was like, I don't think Cockrell's gotten hurt, but if Hayden goes down and I guess Cody Sensabaugh is on the roster, it's going to be Sensabaugh starting. I guess the Steelers were preparing for that anyway, but it's another argument for another day. But what do you think about the signing of Hayden?
Well, before I get into that, just to validate your point, Ross Cockrell has played in all 16 games last season, played in 15 games in 2015, and remember, he didn't start the season with the team, so that also could mean that he could have played, but, he wasn't on the team, so he didn't play. So my assumption is that he has been healthy, or at least able to play in every game that he has ever suited up for. So that's actually a really underrated stat, and that's something that Cockrell has a supreme advantage over Joe Haden in right now. Now, Austin, I'm a little different from you in the fact that I do like this move. I don't like it, however, as much as the rest of Steeler Nation seems to. I do agree it's a good move, though. The Steelers have been one of the top teams in the AFC for the past few years, but they've struggled to get to the top level, being the Super Bowl. Last year, they ran into the Patriots, and we saw exactly how the Steelers could be exposed for their weaknesses. So now, over the course of the offseason, the Steelers have gone with a slight philosophy change to follow more man coverage on defense as opposed to zone coverage. And Ross Cockrell has really struggled this season, as a matter of fact. And yes, the regular season still has not started, but Cockrell has been repeatedly burned in training camp practices. He's been burned in games. And frankly, I have to think his confidence is pretty low. So Cockrell has not been a very good player at this point in time, and I certainly have no real faith in Cody Sensabaugh being a starting level player. He's a special teams player to me and a depth player. That's what I see him as. He should not be starting. Now, the fact that Joe Haden has all those injury questions is definitely a concern, but as far as his contract goes, I'm pretty sure the Steelers set it up in a way that it's going to be easy to cut him after 1 year. And like you were mentioning, the injury is the real question right now. But even if he is able to stay healthy, if he is, big if, yes. But if he is, even at a diminished level, I still think Joe Haden is a step up from guys like Ross Cockrell and Cody Sensabaugh. And I don't know, I think The way I see it is that Ben Roethlisberger's contract, he's probably playing to the end of it and then he's retiring. If that. The Steelers have only a certain amount of time left before their Super Bowl window closes, and it's not what they normally do, but the move that they made here and the other move, which we'll get into in a minute, showed that the Steelers are serious about trying to win now because they know that they don't have much time left. And it's a big risk, big reward kind of move, but I understand why they made it. If Ben Roethlisberger were 25 years old, I probably would not have agreed with this move. But I think that in the current situation of the franchise, it was the right move to make. Now we can move on to the next big move the Steelers made, which was the day before the Steelers traded for San Francisco 49ers tight end Vance McDonald and the 49ers 5th round pick in 2018 for the Steelers 4th round pick from that same year. So, real quickly, what are your thoughts on the acquisition of McDonald, and what does this mean for the Steelers roster, specifically at tight end? Because you would have to think that the Steelers would be probably cutting one of those guys, being Grimble, James, or Johnson. However, we have heard from team officials, we've heard from David Todd, my apologies, that the Steelers are going to try to keep all 4 of those guys, and they'll cut a player from a different position group. We're not sure if that's necessarily true, so we're going to proceed in both cases as if the Steelers kept all 4 tight ends and if they decided to only keep 3. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, Austin.
I put a lot of thought into this, so bear with me. I personally love this trade. I was ecstatic yesterday. I found out when John texted me, and I was so hyper about it. But I've always loved speedy tight ends, and Vance McDonald had 2 plays over 65 yards go for a touchdown in the same season, outrunning so many defenders on both. And while his hands aren't the greatest, last season he got better with just over an 8.3% drop rate, down from over a 19% average his first 3 seasons. Also, to be fair with him, a lot of his drops were from poorly placed balls by bad 49er quarterbacks, as well as some pass breakups. So I don't think his stats as bad as it looks. So then he's also an average blocker, and to me that's just a bonus. So that's good. Then looking at the value of the deal, I think we can agree the Steelers are at least a second-round playoff team this year. That's probably what's going to happen. Then on the flip side, the 49ers didn't really do much and will probably be the top 5 worst teams next year again. So for argument's sake, let's say that the Steelers get eliminated in the AFC Championship, but do better than the loser in the NFC Championship, leaving them at pick 29 in the 2018 draft. We'll say the 49ers finished 5th worst in the league, getting the 5th pick. That means that the Steelers would have traded back only 8 spots in the draft for Vance. I think that's a fantastic deal. It's in the 4th round, too. The 4th round isn't exactly where you find the starters for your team. I mean, some good guys come out of there, but it's usually they start becoming fringe on whether they're going to make the roster or not. But I think it's a fantastic deal. Now, as for who's on the outside looking in, as if they're going to stick with 3 tight ends, it really could be anybody. My guess is probably Grimble, but Justin James' spot is no longer secure, as he's no longer the number 1 tight end in my eyes on this team. And David Johnson's value came in his blocking, and McDonald is decent at blocking. So sincerely, it could be any one of the tight ends, in my opinion. Now, if the Steelers are going to keep 4 tight ends, I just can't see it. It's really hard to take away from other positions, especially when a tight end right now is filled with mediocrity and not much consistency. It doesn't make sense to me to keep guys that you literally traded to get another guy because they weren't consistent enough. It would make way more sense to keep another cornerback or wide receiver or even maybe a running back. I don't like the idea of keeping an extra running back, but I'd prefer it over one of these tight ends. So, what do you think of the Vance McDonald deal?
Let me ask you first. What did we learn about Jesse James over the course of the past 8 months?
He's inconsistent.
We already kind of knew that, though. If I'm gonna be completely honest, I think I learned that Jesse James is probably never gonna be a number 1 tight end, or if he is, he's a very low level tight end. Look, he grew in a lot of spots last year. He grew as a blocker and as a receiver, but his upside is somewhere between Matt Spaeth and Heath Miller, if I'm being completely honest. That's what I think. and it's probably closer to Matt Spaeth. He's definitely more of a number 2 tight end right now. And I think the fact of the matter is James is a decent player, and he shouldn't be, shamed for only being able to be that, because he was a 5th round pick. He wasn't drafted to be a number 1 tight end. So I think that's important to remember when he is getting bashed for not having his best game against the Colts. But at the same point, the Steelers needed that kind of guy. And now that they have that kind of guy in Vance McDonald, I think James can settle in more as a number 2 tight end. And I think that'll be a win-win situation for both guys, in my opinion. I wanted to know if you learned anything else about him this offseason.
Nope, not that I can think of.
Alrighty, so getting into the Vance McDonald trade, I've heard of Vance McDonald. I didn't know much about him since he played in the NFC, but given the circumstances of the tight end position currently and the things that McDonald has accomplished and has the potential to accomplish, I think this is a fantastic move. It's a low-risk move, and even if McDonald doesn't work out, we already mentioned the likelihood of how basically the Steelers dropping back, say, maybe 10, 20 picks, like in a worst-case scenario, just to try something new. And just like I said, the Ben Roethlisberger's on the back 9 of his career. He doesn't have much time left. And getting someone like this, he might not be great. He might not play a ton. He might not be what we think he's going to be. But if he is, it's a huge home run for the Steelers, and they're not giving up a ton for it either. So I think that's a big move there. And the fact of the matter is the tight end group really was not good this offseason. The coaches said David Johnson was the most consistent tight end. And let's think about that for a second. David Johnson is essentially a lead blocker whose job is to block. He does not catch the ball very often. How many catches has David Johnson... Austin, I'm asking you to do this if you don't mind. Can you look up how many catches David Johnson has had in his career, period, and then his career with the Steelers, and then last season? Because I'm betting it's something astronomically low. I think he had only something like 5 catches last year. So if your best tight end, most consistent tight end, is contributing 5 catches on offense, that's unacceptable. Like, I'm sorry, Johnson's a good player. I like David Johnson, but he can't be the number 1 guy. Xavier Grimble flashed a little bit like he did against the Colts, and Jesse James has done some nice things as well, but for the most part, they've both been incredibly inconsistent. And I think Vance McDonald offers more upside than either of those guys, and while his blocking is pretty solid, I still think he's definitely a better player than Jesse James. And even though he probably won't be the starter right away, I imagine he'll slide right in as essentially the number 2, and before long, maybe by the quarter point of the season, he'll be the number 1 tight end. That's what I suspect. And as far as who is the odd man out, quickly assuming that they keep only 3, I have to think it's Grimble. Johnson's carved out his role. James has the pedigree of being a 5th round pick, and he's a solid number 2 option. Grimble's just too inconsistent, in my opinion, so I have to think that Vance McDonald is going to be getting the nod there, and Grimble's going to be on the outside looking in. Now, if the Steelers are cutting another position player, I don't really know who it's going to be. It could be someone like Niall Davis, Fitzgerald Toussaint, Darius Hayward-Bay, maybe Sammy Coates, Steven Johnson. I don't really know where they could go with this, and I hesitate with something like that. I'd prefer that they get rid of the extra tight end because I already think it's a weak position group, and I'm not sure that the upside with Grimble is necessarily there. And I've always thought he was a solid player. I liked what he has been able to show in limited time, but I just think there isn't room for him on the roster, and I think that keeping him would be a mistake when you consider the other players. Like, I'd rather have Niall Davis or Fitzgerald Toussaint than Xavier Grimble, because I know that they can offer more on the field right away than Grimble can. Toussaint's a solid pass blocker. He can contribute in special teams, and so can Niall Davis, and I don't know that Xavier Grimble can do that to the level that those guys can. So that's my opinion on it. Austin, did you get to check out David Johnson's statistics?
I did. Since he's been in the league for the past 9 years, he's only had 31 receptions. 29 of those are with the Steelers. Since 2 years, he was with the Chargers in 2014 and 2015. So, and last year specifically, he had 7 receptions for 80 yards, which his career high for receptions was actually 12 in 2011 with the Steelers. So he's never gotten over 12 receptions in a season.
Interesting. So Yeah, that is very interesting. He also did have one catch that won't go in the stats because it was a 2-point conversion against the Browns. I remember that because it was a nice one-handed catch, and I was like, wow, David Johnson caught that pass. But the point is, he is not an option in the passing game, nor should he be. And by that logic, he should not be the most consistent tight end on your team. So that's, just wanted to get that out of the way there. So a couple other roster moves we wanted to get to quickly. We don't really have anything to say about it. The Steelers started the cut down to 53 players. They don't do the cut down to 75 players anymore. The cut down to 53 has begun. They cut defensive lineman Christian Brown and tight end Faison Odom. You tweeted it earlier, Austin. Odom had practically no chance of making this team, and with the addition of McDonald, it's see ya. Do we know anything? Is Jake McGee still on this roster?
I don't believe so. I think Jake McGee has been cut as well.
In any case, I did like what McGee brought, but I think you and I both knew he was not going to be around either.
No.
So moving on, the Steelers announced their first Hall of Honor class this week. For those who don't know, the Steelers have decided to do what a lot of other teams have already done and have their own kind of Hall of Fame, if you will. The best example I can come up with is what the Buffalo Bills have, being that I'm from Rochester, New York, which is nearby Buffalo, and they induct players who probably aren't good enough to get into the Hall of Fame, but were great players for their respective franchise. So for the original class, the Steelers inducted 27 members, including players, coaches, and other contributors. Now, the reason it's so high is because they wanted their inducted class, original inducted class to contain every major Hall of Famer that played primarily with the Steelers or considered themselves a Steeler when they went to the Hall of Fame. So they added that plus a few other players. So we'll run down the list really quickly here. We got Jerome Bettis, running back, cornerback Mel Blount, quarterback Terry Bradshaw, defensive back Jack Butler, center Dermontti Dawson, running back Bill Dudley, defensive tackle Joe Green, outside linebacker edge rusher Kevin Green, defensive lineman Elsie Greenwood, linebacker Jack Ham, running back Franco Harris, running back Dick Hoke, running back John Henry Johnson, head coach Walter Kiesling, middle linebacker Jack Lambert, quarterback Bobby Lane, coach and running back John McNally, coach Chuck Knoll, former owner and chairman Art Rooney, former chairman Dan Rooney, linebacker Andy Russell, safety Donnie Shell, wide receiver John Stallworth, defensive tackle Ernie Stautner, wide receiver Lynn Swan, center Mike Webster, and defensive back Rod Woodson. So now that you've heard all those names, where's your mind on the thoughts of this first inducted class?
It's a pretty solid list. It's full of Hall of Famers. If you couldn't tell, Jerome Bettis and Mel Blount, along with several others, but I can't really say that I think anyone is really missing at the moment. It seemed to have covered most of the greats. The one that I thought was missing, I don't know if they had a time-sensitive reason. Like, the Hall of Fame obviously has the, I believe, 5-year rule where you have to wait 5 years after the person retired for them to be inducted. But I was surprised not to see Palomalu on there yet. But like I said, I don't know if it's been long enough. What do you think about the list?
Well, to answer that question, Austin, I actually think this Hall of Honor was kind of created to try to give the Steelers a chance to immortalize players that aren't in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Guys like Donnie Shell, guys like Heath Miller, and maybe even Hines Ward, guys who might not make the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but were fantastic Steelers in their own right, guys who contributed to Super Bowls and guys who contributed to some fantastic teams in the 1990s like Greg Lloyd. I think recent players were kept off the list because they intend to induct those guys individually to honor them, because this list is largely composed of Pro Football Hall of Famers, and I think that they don't want to celebrate them more than they already have been celebrated because they're Pro Football Hall of Famers. They want to give other guys a shot to be enshrined and honored in their own right, so that people can remember them for what they did in Pittsburgh, since they won't be remembered in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Whether or not that's right for every specific case that can be your own opinion, but that's just what I think about it. And I think guys like Greg Lloyd, like Heath Miller will be on this list, and I'm sure at some point Troy Polamalu will go as well. So now we can get into the game. Real quick, once again, the Steelers lost that game at Heinz Field 19-15. just some quick notable stats. Both teams went over 300 total yards on the day. The Steelers were at 347, the Colts at 326. The Steelers, each of their three quarterbacks that threw passes in the game got sacked. The Steelers only got one sack. 3 turnovers in this game. The Steelers were responsible for 2 of them while taking the ball away once. The Steelers were also 1 for 4 in the red zone. And they only had 4.8 yards per pass, while the Colts, on the other hand, had 8.9 yards per pass. So getting into this game, it wasn't the Steelers' best offensive showing, but we did see some classic highlights from Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown early on.
Yeah, it was probably, even though it wasn't that great, it was probably the best offensive showing of the preseason thus far, which, as we said, was still rather lackluster. But at least total offense made it over 300 yards. Landry Jones did well besides a late interception thrown. And then Niall Davis was not that great as a runner, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. It was kind of sad. But one of the most worrying things ever was seeing Ben Roethlisberger get sacked. I was like, oh no, you guys couldn't hold up just for him to play his time, but obviously he made it out fine. Also, the hit on Martavis Bryant was worrying. But he made it out good too. So, let's hear what you thought of the offense.
Now, real quickly on the Roethlisberger sack, I heard that was a miscommunication between Ramon Foster and Villanueva, so that wasn't necessarily Villanueva's fault. Just another example of how the chemistry of an offensive line, since they all haven't played together most of this preseason, can affect an offensive line on plays like that. And luckily, yes, he was okay. I did not see the Bryant play. Could you explain that to me?
Basically, it was. I don't remember if it was flagged or not because I watched it after the fact. But basically, it looked like the receiver was intentionally trying to hurt him. He went for his lower body, and it was like after the play was like done. So Martavis got mad about it on Twitter later and stuff. It was just it was kind of like a dirty-ish hit. I wouldn't say it was that dirty, but it did seem like he was intentionally trying to hurt him. So.
Well, in any case, that's certainly concerning. It's a good thing that he came out of it all right. But as far as the rest of the offense goes, the starting offense was okay. Niall Davis had a couple nice runs, but for the most part, like I mentioned before, I'm not a huge fan of him as a running back. He doesn't get upfield quick enough, and he just keeps running laterally when he should just be trying to get upfield. So I was not a huge fan of seeing him run sideline to sideline several times. But outside of that, Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown looked solid. Jesse James was another guy that didn't look very good. He dropped a ball that, granted, was a tough ball to catch, but that was something we expect him to be able to make as a number 1 tight end. And then, of course, Vance McDonald was traded for a day later, so maybe we shouldn't be expecting James to be making any of those for the time being. But elsewhere, Landry Jones, I thought, played very well. And yeah, his stat line isn't fantastic, but when you consider the fact that Jones hadn't really been throwing passes at all since the very start of training camp, I thought he played very well. And his throw to Xavier Grimble, I thought, was a fantastic throw. And Xavier Grimble obviously made a fantastic catch on that play. Seeing Jones play now, it's kind of amazing thinking about how far he's come, where he looked, honestly, I think he looked even worse than Josh Dobbs did at the beginning of this preseason. If not right around the same. And he's turned himself into a pretty solid NFL backup. And yeah, he still doesn't make the best throws. His windup isn't great, and he doesn't have the strongest velocity on his throws. He makes some smart decisions, and I can see how he starts to make plays like an NFL veteran. It's kind of cool seeing him develop from a guy everyone wanted cut, including myself at the beginning of his career. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for him. And I've been a huge critic of his, but he deserves a lot of credit for being able to improve and stay in this league, even if it's been kind of a long process for him. So good for him. Moving on to the other side of the ball, it was another rough game for the Steelers starting defense, wasn't it?
Yeah, even though they performed not the worst, I wouldn't say it was that. It was bad. It's bad for a team that's supposed to be a Super Bowl contender. So normally holding team to 19 points to a decent defensive outing, but they should have been better and stopped some more big plays. Like when it's 3rd and long and the defense gave up a 24-yard play. But easily one of the worst things was the tackling. Namely, what comes to mind is a 55-yard pass to Dante Moncrief. which should have only been a 20-yard pass, but where Robert Golden as well as Artie Burns literally ran into each other, preventing each other from making the tackle, which turned the 20-yard pass into a 55-yard gain. It was just not very pretty. What did you think?
Yeah, once again, the starting defense wasn't as good as we were hoping to see. The defensive line was pretty solid, but when you consider the quarterbacks the Steelers were facing, mainly Scott Tolzien and Stephen Morris, you wanted to see a lot more. Ross Cockrell had another rough game, and Artie Burns didn't have a good game himself, which was probably his first poor performance of the season. The run defense was statistically sound, but there were times they gave up some big chunks up the middle. And, overall wasn't terrible. 19 points is okay, but there were some notable missed tackles by the starters or guys that are going to be receiving key playing time in Artie Burns, William Gay, and Ryan Shazier. All those guys missed tackles when I went back and watched the game, and that's something that really, really cannot happen going forward. You really don't want to see stuff like that. And I did like the way guys like Cameron Sutton played in his NFL debut, and I thought Stephon Tuitt and TJ Watt were also pretty solid, so that was a good sign too. So we can move on right into special teams. And Austin, I have nothing to say. I know what you're going to say, so I'll let you take it away. There was actually something to talk about with the special teams this week.
Sadly, we get to mention a long snapper. Colin Holba sailed a snap too high, and it might have played a part in Boswell missing the extra point there, which, in fact, it probably was the reason why. So special teams didn't have a good day in that regard, and that was kind of sad to see. I was hoping not to see anything about Colin Holba anytime soon, but, I mean, it was just a mistake. I'm going to pretend like it didn't happen and that Colin Holba's still Hall of Fame material out here. But everything else was fine. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I mean, the kick returning isn't spectacular, but we shouldn't expect that at this point in the NFL today. Also, for Holba, let's just hope that if it's a mistake, you'd rather him do it now than in a game that really matters,
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. So we can move ahead into our awards for the week. So our Stronger Than Steel Big Stop of the Week. There really isn't much to go on for this game, so I'm giving it to Ryan Shazier. He had the Steelers' only takeaway of the day. It was a nice interception of Scott Tolzien. He finished the day with one tackle, but that interception was it was a good play, and it gave the Steelers the ball back, obviously. So he pretty much wins by default this week. So hopefully next week we'll have something more substantial, and if not, the regular season starts in 2 weeks. So congratulations to Ryan Shazier with an interception and winning the third edition of the Stronger Than Steel Big Stop of the Week. So now moving on, Austin, who is the Stronger Than Steel Player of the Week?
For averaging 5 yards a carry, over 10 yards a reception, and his consistency at running back through the games he's played thus far, our Stronger Than Steel Player of the Week is Terrell Watson, so congratulations to him.
All right. So a couple of players we're going to talk a little bit about. Austin, tell me one player that impressed you in the game and one player that disappointed you.
One player that impressed me was Xavier Grimble. While his stat line wasn't that amazing, it was 3 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown, I believe. He really showed improvements as a blocker in this game. I saw him doing a lot of good blocking, and I was a little impressed with him since one of his problems has been blocking in the past. So good for him. And one that disappointed, I found it really hard to single out a person because everyone was really making mistakes. I'm going to go with Artie Burns. That one missed tackle with Robert Golden really left a bad taste in my mouth. Reminded me of my problems with Burns last year and how I would often critique him on how he wasn't very good at tackling. So, but let's hear your 2 players, the one that impressed and the one that disappointed.
I'm going to start with the double whammy for disappointed players, and I already ragged on Niall Davis a lot, so I'm not going to keep beating the dead horse there. The other player that disappointed me was Justin Hunter, and I don't know, maybe it's not disappointing if I don't expect much anymore, but for the 3rd week in a row, we were hoping to see anything from Justin Hunter, and we did not, again. Same old story for Justin Hunter. All the potential in the world, all the physical tools, and it doesn't translate to success on the football field. Austin's fears and concerns about Hunter have been realized, and I think the Steelers coaching staff has realized that now. And he didn't get a lot of targets and was not on the field much. So I think it's safe to assume that Hunter's time in Pittsburgh, after a brief flash in the pan at the beginning of training camp, is more than likely over with another disappointing performance. On the other side, I already talked a little bit about Landry Jones. He did impress me, and I really have nothing more to say other than what I said earlier. But he is the Steelers' number 2 quarterback, and I am pretty comfortable with him needing to come into a game situation should Ben Roethlisberger get hurt. I am happy having Landry Jones being the top backup in Pittsburgh for the next couple of years. So now that'll do it for our Steelers news for the time being. So we have some other NFL news to get to besides the whole Joe Haden release and signing. The other day, the Lions made Matthew Stafford the richest man in the NFL with a 5-year extension worth $135 million in total, with $92 million being guaranteed. His $27 million a year surpasses the contract record set by Derek Carr earlier this summer by $2 million per season. So what are your thoughts on this extension? Is it warranted?
The market is going to continually go up for quarterbacks regardless of how good the actual quarterback is. If a team has a quarterback that they are confident, they need to pay him, and that's just kind of how it goes. Teams kind of have to accept that. It doesn't matter if they're not Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. All that matters is consistency that is average or above, and that is Matt Stafford, almost to a T. To be fair, Stafford throws way more than most quarterbacks due to the fact that he's never had a decent running back with him in Detroit. So he's more valuable to the team than one would think, but he's still only maybe slightly above average. But still, that's not something the Lions can afford to lose, as it is way harder to have to go to the draft to find a quarterback in most cases. So they had to keep their quarterback happy. Does he deserve it? Not in the slightest, but it's just kind of the way it goes. What did you think of the deal?
It's a good point, Austin. A good thing to put in perspective that these guys are making all these record-breaking contracts, but I always seem to forget that the salary cap and revenue sharing, that they're making more money every year. So I failed to take that into account, and I was bashing Stafford. But the fact of the matter is, you're completely right. Stafford is a solid NFL quarterback. He's definitely in the top half. I don't know if he's a top 10 quarterback. He might be on a good day. He's shown some really good things at times, but the problem is he's never won a playoff game. And yes, that's not entirely his fault. A lot of it is on the Lions front office and coaching staff for not getting a better team together. But at some point, Stafford's got to do something. I mean, he got a lot of money thrown at him, but he also didn't have to stay in Detroit either. He could have went somewhere else to be a winner. And will he be a winner at the end of this contract? Maybe. Maybe they'll win a couple playoff games, but I just don't see it. So he might have just locked himself into mediocrity. So that's his choice, though. He'll be making money hand over fist. So I guess he should be the one laughing at me, not vice versa. So I guess I really have to eat my words here, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We'll move on from that and our misery and the fact that we aren't making anything close to that. So. Some other NFL news today. Austin, you're the one that informed me about this, so I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Sure. The Browns have made many roster moves this offseason, and today they cut. Wow, why is his name slipping my mind? What's cornerback? That we just got?
Joe Haden?
Joe Haden. I couldn't think of his name. I don't know why it just slipped me. They cut Joe Haden this morning. Then later they traded offensive lineman Cameron Irving, which is the news I wanted to get to the Chiefs for the Chiefs' 2018 fifth-round pick. Interesting to note that after this trade, the Browns only have one first-rounder still left on their roster from 2009 to 2015, and that's defensive tackle Danny Shelton. Also, this pick from the Chiefs is now the 13th pick the Browns have in the 2018 draft. They have every single one of their picks. But just to list the other ones they have, in the first round they have Houston's. In the second round they have Houston's and Philadelphia's. That's three. They have 3 picks in total in round 2. In round 4 they have Carolina's. In round 5 they have Kansas City's from this trade. And round 6 they have Pittsburgh's from the Justin Gilbert trade from last season. It's really stacking up for them. What do you have to say about this?
Well, assuming they don't make any more moves, this puts them in a good position for the NFL draft upcoming, just like they were in last year. They ended up making some trades, but they still had 3 first-round picks, and they all look pretty promising. Looks like the Browns may finally have the base work down for rebuilding their team. And could they have picked a better time to do it, Austin? I really don't think so. Ben Roethlisberger is going to be retiring soon, so that means the Steelers are going to be in a quick retooling, rebuilding mode. Elsewhere in the AFC North, the Bengals and Ravens don't really have anything inspiring on their teams right now, so geez, it's a scary thought, but the Browns could be the front runner for this division in a few years. Am I wrong?
I have to agree with you. If you have 13 draft picks, you have to get one right eventually. But like on the serious side, the Browns may be one of the younger upcoming teams in 2 or 3 years. As you said, with the quarterback uncertain for the Steelers in the future, because it sure as hell, or at least I hope not, that it's not Josh Dobbs. Flacco and Dalton getting older, as well as the teams as a whole not really improving. The Browns can really rise up in the upcoming years. But I'll let you take over for the Steelers-Panthers preview out here.
Alrighty. So that'll conclude our first part episode. We are wrapping this up into a 2-part episode just because it's Wednesday night and the Steelers' 4th and final preseason game is tomorrow on a Thursday. So it's a quick week, a quick turnaround for the final preseason game. But hey, you know what? The preseason will finally be over with, and we can look forward to that first NFL game. Who's playing on Thursday? Next Thursday?
That's a good question.
It's New England, right? It has to be New England. It's always the Super Bowl winner from the previous year.
Oh, is it Chiefs New England? I believe
that sounds right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have just over a week until then. I can't wait. It's gonna be fun, even though the Chiefs are probably gonna get wiped. But we can talk about that at another time. It's regular season football. It's football that matters, so we can finally get excited for that. But in any case, we will move on to the preview of the Steelers' final preseason game, the game annually where none of the starters play at all, or some of them do, but they don't play long at all. So now that the roster cut to 75 no longer exists, I honestly, Austin, I suspect backups will play the entire game. Are we going to see anyone of consequence playing tomorrow at 7:30?
No, after last week with Martavis Bryant, the Martavis Bryant scare, and seeing what happened to Odell and the Giants, I like to believe the Steelers will know better to play any of the stars that they don't need to, and they have big decisions coming soon anyway. And not to mention, I didn't even say the bigger ones. Odell is only minor. Julian Edelman and Spencer Ware both are out for the season, and those were big pieces of their teams respectively. But what do you have to say about the whole thing?
Oh, I'm in complete agreement. The Steelers have been one of the teams that seems to have been going more in the direction of playing their starters less and less during the preseason, so there's no reason to think that any of them are going to play. The only guys I think that are going to play that are expected to have significant playing time are the young rookies, guys like TJ Watt and Cameron Sutton, that are probably going to get maybe a half of time before they give way to the backups who are, just fighting for roster spots 50 through 53, or guys who are just, sending out flyers to other teams because it's the last chance they have. So yeah, I'm not expecting anything important going on here. So what else are we going to be looking for in this game? Is there really anything else to look for right now? Any other positional battles? I didn't even think about this. What are the positional battles still need to be resolved? Maybe running back, but I think the receiver group is pretty much set.
I believe the main 3 positions are going to be fought for this game. I didn't actually even think of running back. I'm going to change it right now because I have receiver there first. Our running back, tight end, and most importantly, cornerback. This game is probably going to decide. I'm guessing Deshaun Phillips is going to be cut immediately. I can't imagine him making it now. He didn't even get a shot. He just kind of got traded for and out. That was expected. That's what happens when you trade your 3rd or 4th team center for him. But then it's like after that, what's going to happen? Is Ross Cockrell out? Are they going to try and get him to take less money and somehow make it work? Or are they going to have Cody Sensabaugh out? It's a big mess for a cornerback right now. And not to mention Mike Hilton just kind of came out of the blue, and Mike Hilton seems to have secured his roster spot. So it's really tough to decide. What do you think about this?
I don't know. It really is tough to tell. There's a huge logjam at cornerback right now. And now that we're not entirely sure what's happening at tight end, it really raises a ton of questions for any other position. So now, of course, we're going to have to wait, which is always fun. But it's tough. I really think the receiver battle is done, to be completely honest with you. And I think running back, as much as I hate to say it, I think Terrell Watson is going to get cut. I think he's a practice squad candidate. And even though I love Fitzgerald Toussaint, I think they're going to keep Niall Davis over him. So I think that's pretty much all set. And then cornerback, oh God, your guess is as good as mine. The only thing I can say for sure is that Senquez Golson will be cut. I mean, seriously, like, let's think about this right now. Who do the Steelers have that could play like on the roster? You have Artie Burns, Joe Haden, Ross Cockrell, Cody Sensabaugh, William Gay, Cameron Sutton, Mike Hilton. Am I missing anyone? Brian Allen. I don't think he's making the team, Austin.
No, but he can play.
All right, fair enough. So that's 8 guys right there. And even if you eliminate Brian Allen, that's 7 guys who staked a significant claim to playing this season. So that means 2 guys most likely are going to get cut. So could it be Ross Cockrell? I don't know. Maybe. He hasn't been a good fit, but I still... just like you were saying with the whole Joe Haden injury, what happens if Joe Haden, boom, goes down early on in the season? I'd still rather have Ross Cockrell than Cody Sensabaugh, wouldn't you?
I would have to agree. It would be an interesting situation. This has been one of the most interesting Steelers offseason in the past years. There's been now, 2 trades? The one was small. Obviously, the one was last week for Deshaun Phillips. But it might be interesting to think that if the Steelers, instead of cutting him, might want to just try and trade Ross Cockrell to someone where he can fit better. Because I would say Ross Cockrell can still be a starter somewhere. It's just he's not that great. I feel like the Steelers could still get something out of him. Well, looking at Cody Sensabaugh, I just can't see him getting anything out of him. I feel like you could trade Ross Cockrell, but you could only cut Cody Sensabaugh. So it'd be interesting to see if the Steelers tried just trading him, seeing what the market's like.
I don't know. It's unfortunate. This is a tough time to trade people, too, though, especially right before the cut down. So you might not be able to trade Cockrell unless you keep him right now.
That makes sense.
I don't know. Maybe Cody Sensabaugh is now on the roster bubble. I mean, who do you cut now? I would cut Brian Allen, which leaves 2 more guys. I have to think you cut either Cockrell or Sensabaugh, one of those 2 guys, right?
It only makes sense. You can, unless what Steelers fans talked about from the beginning of the season was cutting William Gay, but that just doesn't make sense. William Gay is still fantastic. He's still doing great. He's still probably the best cornerback on the roster. So
don't you mean in the slot? He's not the best cornerback on the roster. Artie Burns is.
I don't know. It's hard for me because I like William Gay a lot.
Oh, don't worry. Me too. William Gay has been one of my favorite players over the last few years. I hated the way he was treated early on in his career, and he really rebounded, and he's tied for the Steelers' record with pick sixes, by the way. So just that's something to look out for too. But man, watching him get burned over and over again by Chris Hogan and Julian Edelman in the AFC Championship game really just left a burning impression on my mind, and I don't really think he is the Steelers' best corner anymore. I still think he's solid, don't get me wrong. I think there's no way he's getting cut, though, even after all that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that.
So who is the other guy? Who is the other guy? Is it both of them? Do both of those guys get cut?
Who knows? Maybe the Steelers, if I remember correctly, I'll look it up while I'm talking about it. I believe the Steelers have kept 7 cornerbacks at one point.
But when, though?
I have no idea. I think I don't even know how to type this into Google.
Jeez, you'd have to like look up the roster on Pro Football Reference and then sort it by position and then just go year by year.
Oh, really? Okay.
That'd be my guess. And then, geez, I don't even know it's kind of funny. Like, they made 2 moves that the fans were right behind and they really wanted to see those moves be made, and then yet at the same point, here we are. Now it's just it's complicated everything for the final roster, so I have really no idea where it's going to go from here.
I don't think anything is going to make sense when the 53-man roster is being made. I think it's going to be debated who should have been cut, regardless of what happens. I think everyone's going to be salty. There's going to be a lot of anger around Steeler Nation, and I can't find a way to see it. I'm pretty confident. If I find it by next podcast, I'll bring it up right at the beginning. But I can't find it right now. I'll have to put in more effort later.
Alrighty. In any case, we can move on to. I had something I wanted to say, but I forgot. I don't know. It's strange. When did the when is the actual roster cut down official? Is it Sunday?
This Sunday.
Okay,
yep.
Cool. So we only have a few more days to go. So it's not. This won't be driving me crazy for a week. That's good. All right. So moving on. Do you have any bold predictions for tomorrow night's game, Austin?
It's going to be hard to predict, so I'm going to make them crazy. As Mike Hilton gets a safety, just why not? And then only tight ends catch touchdowns, making it much harder in the tight end race. Do you have any bold predictions?
Yeah, your extremely bold predictions have forced me to up the ante on my predictions. So, keep in mind that I still think this is a very bold prediction. I think Sammy Coates has a long touchdown reception, a la September of 2016, the good old days. My second is that Anthony Chickillo has a sack, a forced fumble, and a touchdown because of it. Yay. Finally, I have Cameron Sutton records an interception and a sack, which might be a bold prediction only because he might play a quarter. So, we'll see about that, huh?
That would be a pretty amazing quarter.
For sure. So now we can move into our final score predictions, Austin. This is as big a crapshoot as any preseason game ever could be. So what is your wildest prediction for this game?
I'm going to see if I can get one preseason game right here. I say the Steelers win 24-16. I don't know how the Panthers are getting to 16, but they are. So what do you have?
I went in a similar scoring route, but I went with a different team winning. I had the Panthers defeating the Steelers 23-17, and again, I have no idea how these teams are getting there, but I know it's ugly football, and ugly football usually means not many touchdowns, missed extra points, and all those lovely things, just like last week. And now the backups are going to be playing the whole game, so who knows? It could also be a shootout. I mean, for all we know, maybe Josh Dobbs and gosh, who's like the number 3 quarterback in Carolina? Do we even want to know?
I don't know. It's behind.
Well, I know Derek Anderson's the backup, which...
Is it Webb? It might be Webb.
Oh, Joe Webb?
Yeah.
That's right, it is, because I remember I was watching their preseason game against the Texans in Week 1. So yeah, Joe Webb. I always liked Joe Webb. I thought he was solid. You know, an athlete. I mean, not like a quarterback, a solid athlete.
Yeah. Doesn't he do like kick returns now? Isn't he like a crazy athlete for the Carolinas?
He's kind of, if you want to think of an equivalent, he's kind of like Antoine Randall, but not as good. I believe he was a receiver when he was with Minnesota. He did kick returns, and he can play quarterback, obviously. So that's right there, you know.
Pretty interesting. You don't hear about quarterbacks doing kick returns that often.
Yeah, it's certainly not something you see every day. But Austin, oh yeah, we have one more thing I wanted to talk about. I forgot about this. We talked about it earlier in the preseason, but how would you prefer the preseason be in the NFL? Would you prefer it to be shorter, longer? Would you like to see a 2-game preseason, 3 games, or like what do you want? What would you want if you were the commissioner?
If I was the commissioner, I would have a 4-game preseason, just as it is. I can't bear to go very long without football, so the idea of reducing a week, it's going to take a week longer to get football back, just doesn't sound appealing to me. I don't care if it's preseason football and everyone hates it. I want to see it. I need it. I need my football. It only lasts for a few amount of the months in the year, and I need as much of it as possible before it goes away, because it's only going to last till February. You only got 6 months. We only got 6 months here. So I want as much of it as possible. So I'd keep it at 4. I wouldn't extend it to 5 because that's getting a little too much. I like where it's at. 4 is where I settle. What do you think?
Fair enough. What about the Hall of Fame game, though? Because I have an idea about that game. Do you want to hear my idea first?
Sure.
Change the Hall of Fame game and make it the first week of the first preseason week. Now, instead of just making it a random time, do what you do with the NFL regular season where it's played on a Thursday instead. So that way it has its own time slot, but that way a team doesn't have to play an extra game and have the extra risk of injury like the Steelers learned a few years ago with Sean Sweesom, starting that whole fiasco where they brought in Garrett Hartley and Josh Scobie and then finally settled on Chris Boswell, you know?
Oh my God. Don't say that name ever again. Josh Scobie. Oh my God.
You just said it. Don't tell me not to say it and then say it.
I can't help it. I just remember the Steelers losing to the Ravens. What was it, 2 years ago? Because Josh Scobie missed 2 kicks.
Keep in mind that he missed 2 kicks against the Patriots in that season opener too, and he missed an extra point against the Niners. You know, I heard every time you say his name, a football travels wide left of a goalpost somewhere in America.
I thought that was Blair Walsh.
I think it could be Blair Walsh, Mike Vanderjagt. Geez, I'm not even gonna say the Bills kicker's name because he's been beaten to death. That poor guy.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, I'm not even gonna go there. I'll give him the break. I'm not gonna give any of the other guys a break. But, in any case, we're off that subject. So, the way I see it is, I'd like to see 3 preseason games. I think that's a perfect amount, and we can do the Hall of Fame game, like I talked about, on the Thursday night of the first week. It just eliminates the first week of the preseason, and a lot of the starters are starting to not play that game anyway, so it's kind of like the 4th preseason game in a way. So now you can have the second preseason game being the first game, where some of the starters play, and some of them play into the second quarter, maybe to halftime, and then the third preseason game, that's the official preseason game where everyone gets ready, and then the 4th game, that's unavoidable. That's always going to be the game where none of the starters play. So I think that's acceptable, but I do see where you're coming from too, Austin.
Thank you, sir.
So does that wrap things up for tonight?
I believe it does.
Wow, that was a ton of information for us to get to, but we are 1 week away from the NFL regular season returning. It's exciting. I can't wait. It's been a while since I've had something to care about as far as sports go. Being a fan of all the Pittsburgh teams, I didn't really have much interest in the baseball team this season because the Pirates have punted on any success in the future, and the Penguins won the Stanley Cup back in June, so that means a few months since anything interesting has been happening for me. So I really got to get back into it, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Can't wait. Cannot wait. But for the meantime, Steeler Nation, if you have any questions about the show, or you want to ask us questions that we can answer on air, email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our various social media outlets. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our Twitter handle is @stronger_steel. Instagram, it is @stronger_steel_NFL. Facebook, it is @StrongerThanSteelPodcast, and that is also our name on SoundCloud and YouTube where we post our episodes. And we have our own website, StrongerThanSteelNFL.blogspot.com. I think that covers about everything, Austin, so I think we can... Yes?
I'm just gonna say this. In the comments below, tell us which cornerbacks, maybe it's not 2, are gonna be cut. I want to know. Comment down below.
That's true. Now, keep in mind, I think, Austin, it's fair for us to assume that the Steelers keep 5 cornerbacks in this case. So name the 5 that you're going to keep and the last 2 guys you're going to cut and send out. So the guys you keep and the guys you send out. And this is obviously after the Joe Haden trade, so include him in your roster. So thank you. Yeah, comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And, because we talked about it, we'd like to hear what you think too. So get a good pulse on Steeler Nation there as we approach the final preseason game. It's almost done. And thank God for all that. So, Austin, thank you again for joining me tonight. And are you going to be able to watch the game tomorrow?
I am not. I'm going to be at work.
Darn, you get to miss 20 carries from Trey Williams.
I can't wait. I'm so excited to see the stat line. Don't you worry.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that'll do it from us tonight. Thank you again for joining us, Steeler Nation, and we'll be back on next week previewing the Steelers' opening day game against the Cleveland Browns and Joe Haden's return to Cleveland. Fun fact.
Woo.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Have a good night.